The warning sirens echoed across the colony of New Carthage as the massive alien vessels emerged from hyperspace. Commander Marcus Aurelius Varn stood on the observation deck of the Coastal Defense Station, his weathered hands gripping the railing as he watched the enemy fleet descend through the purple clouds of Kepler 442b. The Draconari had finally come, just as humanity had feared for the past 3 decades. The colony stretched along the shores of the Tyrian Sea, a vast body of liquid methane that sparkled under the light of twin suns. 200,000 humans called this place home. They had built their city in the ancient style of their ancestors, with towering marble columns and grand archways that connected massive biodomes. The founders had wanted to preserve something of old Earth here, something that reminded them of the civilization that had once flourished around the Mediterranean. Now that civilization faced extinction. Marcus turned to his second-in-command, a young woman named Julia Scipio. Her dark eyes reflected the distant lights of the approaching fleet. There were at least 40 warships, each one measuring over 2 kilometers in length. The Draconari were a reptilian species that had conquered 17 star systems in the past century. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They simply consumed everything in their path. The communication systems crackled with intercepted transmissions. The Draconari admiral was broadcasting a message to his fleet, and the translation software converted his hissing language into words that made Marcus's blood run cold. The alien commander spoke of how easily human colonies fell, how the soft mammals of Earth posed no real threat to the superior Draconari warriors. He promised his soldiers that New Carthage would fall within 2 standard days. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The Draconari had made a critical error. They had studied human technology and human weapons, but they had never bothered to study human history. The commander walked to the central console and activated the colony-wide broadcast system. His voice reached every home, every shelter, every defensive position in New Carthage. He spoke calmly, reminding his people of who they were and where they came from. He told them about the ancient city of Carthage on Earth, which had once stood against the greatest military power of its age. He spoke of how their ancestors had faced impossible odds throughout history and had survived through courage, ingenuity, and an absolute refusal to surrender. The response was immediate. Across the colony, civilians began moving to their assigned positions. Engineers powered up the defensive shields that surrounded the biodomes. Pilots rushed to their fighter craft. Soldiers checked their weapons and prepared for ground combat. The people of New Carthage were not running. They were not hiding. They were preparing to fight. Julia watched the civilian response on her tactical display and felt pride swelling in her chest. The Draconari had conquered species that were technologically superior to humanity. They had defeated races with stronger bodies and sharper minds. But they had never faced an enemy quite like this one. The enemy fleet entered orbit and began launching landing craft toward the surface. Thousands of Draconari soldiers poured down through the atmosphere, their dropships screaming toward the coastal regions of the colony. Marcus had anticipated this strategy. The aliens always attacked directly, relying on overwhelming force to crush their enemies quickly. The first wave of dropships approached the harbor, where the colony's transport vessels were docked. These ships were supposed to be the evacuation fleet, but Marcus had ordered them to remain in place. As the Draconari landing craft descended toward the water, the transport vessels suddenly revealed their true purpose. Hidden panels slid open along their hulls, exposing rows of plasma cannons that had been salvaged from decommissioned warships. The ambush was devastating. Dozens of Draconari dropships exploded in midair, their wreckage falling into the methane sea with tremendous splashes. The alien commander had expected a defenseless civilian population. Instead, he found a carefully prepared killing ground. But the Draconari were not easily deterred. They adjusted their approach and sent wave after wave of landing craft toward different sections of the coastline. Some of them managed to touch down on the rocky shores beyond the harbor. Reptilian soldiers poured out of the transports, their scaled bodies covered in black armor that absorbed light like darkness itself. The ground defenders were waiting for them. Human soldiers had dug trenches and fortified positions all along the coastal cliffs. They opened fire with pulse rifles and shoulder-mounted missile launchers. The Draconari were fast and strong, but they were charging uphill against entrenched positions manned by soldiers who knew every centimeter of the terrain. Marcus monitored the battle from the command center, issuing orders and coordinating the defense. He noticed that the Draconari were trying to flank the main defensive line by sending troops through a narrow canyon to the north. The alien commander was skilled, but he was using the same tactics that countless human generals had used throughout history. Marcus had studied those tactics since childhood. He ordered a reserve unit to seal the canyon with explosive charges. The resulting rock slide buried the flanking force under tons of debris. The Draconari advance stalled as their soldiers found themselves trapped between fortified positions and natural obstacles. Hours passed, and the fighting continued without pause. The Draconari brought down heavy weapons from orbit, trying to blast through the colony's shields. The energy barriers flickered and sparked under the bombardment, but they held firm. Human engineers had designed these shields based on captured alien technology, improving upon the original designs with human innovation. Julia led a counterattack against a Draconari force that had managed to breach the outer perimeter near the eastern biodome. She moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, her powered armor amplifying her strength and speed. The Draconari soldiers towered over her by nearly a meter, but she had trained for this moment her entire life. She fought not just with weapons, but with the accumulated tactical knowledge of a species that had been waging war against itself for thousands of years. The aliens were fierce warriors, but they fought as individuals, each one seeking personal glory. Julia's soldiers fought as a unit, covering each other and exploiting every weakness in the enemy formation. Within an hour, the breach was sealed and the surviving Draconari were retreating toward the shore. In orbit, the alien admiral watched the battle unfold with growing frustration. His ground forces were being systematically destroyed by a species that his intelligence reports had classified as weak and cowardly. He ordered his warships to begin direct bombardment of the colony, abandoning the ground assault in favor of total annihilation. Marcus had expected this too. The moment the orbital bombardment began, he activated the colony's final defense system. Deep beneath the surface of New Carthage, massive electromagnetic launchers powered up and aimed toward the sky. These weapons had been built in secret over the past decade, hidden from alien surveillance and waiting for this exact moment. The first salvo struck the Draconari flagship with devastating force. Kinetic projectiles, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, punched through the alien vessel's shields and tore holes in its armored hull. Secondary explosions rippled across the ship as its reactor systems began to fail. The alien fleet scattered in confusion as more projectiles streaked up from the surface. Human weapons technology was supposed to be primitive compared to Draconari systems. The reptilian commanders could not understand how these mammals had developed such powerful weapons without any indication in their intelligence reports. The answer was simple. Humans had learned long ago to hide their true capabilities from potential enemies. The people of New Carthage had spent years preparing for this invasion while pretending to be helpless colonists. Every transport ship, every underground bunker, every civilian facility had been designed with hidden military applications. The Draconari admiral ordered a retreat, but Marcus was not finished. Fighter craft launched from hidden hangars across the colony, pursuing the fleeing alien vessels. The small human ships were faster and more maneuverable than the massive Draconari warships. They swarmed around the enemy fleet like ancient Roman fire ships, targeting engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. By the time the battle ended, only 7 Draconari vessels remained operational. They limped away toward the edge of the system, their weapons silenced and their crews demoralized. The invasion force that had expected an easy victory was fleeing in disgrace. Marcus stood on the observation deck once again, watching the enemy ships disappear into the darkness of space. The colony had suffered damage, and many good soldiers had died defending their home. But New Carthage still stood, and its people remained free. Julia joined him as the twin suns began to set over the Tyrian Sea. The purple clouds turned golden in the fading light, and the damaged biodomes glittered like jewels along the coastline. The battle was over, but both officers knew that this was only the beginning. The Draconari Empire would not accept this defeat quietly. They would return with a larger fleet and more powerful weapons. But humanity would be ready for them. The people of New Carthage had proven something important today. They had shown the galaxy that humans were not the weak and primitive species that the Draconari believed them to be. They were the descendants of warriors and builders, explorers and survivors. They carried the memories of 100 civilizations that had risen and fallen on their homeworld. Marcus activated the colony-wide broadcast one more time. He told his people to rest, to mourn their dead, and to celebrate their victory. But he also told them to begin preparing for the next battle. The Draconari had made their intentions clear. There would be no peace between their species, only war. The commander looked out at the city his people had built on this distant world. They had named it after an ancient civilization that had been destroyed by its enemies long ago. But unlike the original Carthage, this colony would not fall. Its people had learned from the mistakes of history. They had built something stronger, something that could withstand any siege. The Roman fleet had approached the harbor, expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they had found an enemy that refused to break. And in the days and years that followed, the galaxy would learn what every human child already knew from their history books. Empires rise and empires fall, but humanity endures. Always. The twin suns disappeared below the horizon, and the stars emerged in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, the Draconari were licking their wounds and planning their revenge. But the people of New Carthage were not afraid. They had faced the storm and survived. They were human, and that was enough. Marcus finally allowed himself to smile as he turned away from the observation window. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The siege of New Carthage would be remembered throughout human history as the day when humanity announced its presence to the galaxy. Not as victims, not as prey, but as warriors who would never surrender their freedom. The coastal city had prepared for siege, and the siege had failed. Now it was time to prepare for the next chapter in humanity's long journey among the stars.